So a little bit about me. I'm a Midwestern boy. I'm from the south side of Chicago in Hyde Park. I was born and raised in a multicultural household, but I'm a single mom. So she spent a lot of time and effort making sure I had every connection to both African and Caribbean culture, but also my Eastern European roots. And I feel like a lot of that kind of comes together in my work, trying to make sense of these two very different worlds and to find a kind of harmony somewhere in the middle. I label myself an abstract expressionist, but as you can tell, I definitely tend to lean in towards representational painting. One of my biggest pet peeves about abstract painting is it can lend itself to being read too fastly. Some people can be like, what's it about? Like, I don't see anything. So one thing I really try to establish with my work is effort and a journey that's intended for my viewer. I find that art's a really good way for everyone to kind of plug out of the external world, something I kind of label as the binary atmosphere, the first part of the title. We all make decisions. Eventually, if you make the right decisions, your life kind of turns into an atmosphere of existence. You know, you go here, you go there, you have an identity based on a very binary decision process that we all go through. Now, it gets a little bit more intense in the internal frame of all of our brains, or our subconscious kind of rules, if you will. This work is really about the harmony and the tension between the conscious and the subconscious world. For here, behind me in this piece, Symphony of Genesis, the second psalm, I'm thinking about both the internal landscape of creation and the external kind of thinking of the Garden of Eden, or this uncontextualized pastoral place. Wouldn't that be nice, like a place with no concrete, no trees? Growing up in the city my whole life, that was something I always spent a lot of time thinking about, is nature. I was a huge outdoor enthusiast when I was younger. I would summer in northern Michigan with my grandfather, where I would spend like 10 hours a day following bugs around the forest and stuff, completely immersed in my own world. And it wasn't until probably 10 years later that I was thinking about going into marine biology that I realized that all those afternoons trudging through muddy rivers and like getting completely lost in the woods as a 5-year-old were worth it. It really demonstrated like an interest in the world, how natural systems worked, but also just a surveying. Like, I loved watching stuff. I loved just observing the world and trying to put the pieces together. And a lot of my painting style is me trying to do that with my internal landscape. So I'm going to direct you guys' attention over here to this larger piece down here. So as I mentioned before, coming from two immigrant families making a home here in America, the concept of diaspora was something we talked about a lot growing up. Definitely weird dinner conversation as a third grader. Talking about, diaspora and like taking a culture from one place and as it changes and tries to find a home in other places. So by far the most representational piece in the whole show, which is why I want to take some time to talk about it. In the lower foreground, you have a collection of boats or vessels, kind of people waiting in the harbor to get onto the land. And it's very fitting in today's climate with, immigration being on the top of the political conversations, and also just a moral matter that we all, I think, have been forced to contemplate. This painting is really a group of people looking out on this farther landscape and wanting to have a piece of that, but then you also have this midsection of architecture, of a city, of the kind of hang-ups that actually urban life bring you. So you have this beautiful, expansive space that seems like you have a lot of room, but for someone like me growing up in a small apartment in the city, you're really on a boat with maybe one or two other people looking out to the future, trying to put your money together, trying to put your 2 cents together to try and figure out how you can leave that boat and maybe get to the land, or furthermore, get past the land to another deeper journey. A lot of painters, one of my favorite to quote, de Kooning, said artists have to paint within the void of themselves as it relates to history. And that's something that I kind of come back to constantly. As I learn more about art history, I see more people like me, whether it's Vincent van Gogh, who was a street kid, or Egon Schiele or Klimt, people that didn't necessarily have a direct life path, found observing the world around them and reproducing it in a kind of earnest yet intrinsic way to look at themselves gave them a life purpose. And I find that that's what makes the work of all the great painters in the past so valid, is it comes from true life experience. I mean, you wouldn't have good painting, unfortunately, without struggle, which is why the post-war modern abstractionists are such a huge inspiration for me. You have people trying to grasp for more. You have them exploring emotions, especially from a male point of view, kind of digging past the stoic surface to the more soft and somewhat, expressive parts of one's identity. And I find abstraction to be the perfect tool for that. I mean, what other tool allows you to measure the things you can't define? There's always these two things in human progression. We see something we can't define, and then we measure it, and it makes it known. And I find painting to be a tool that we do that with internally. Putting an emotion on an 8 by 5 foot canvas like this, the emotion of diaspora, not being fitted in, trying to look for some place to settle. When you can reflect on it on a large two-dimensional surface, you can then start to put yourself in that position. And there's been this kind of reactive history of abstract painting where people feel something when they look at it. And I feel like that is a really, really good internal way to take a journey. So I paint my paintings with a narrative in mind. So you look at a piece, you want to explore it. Now when you look at it, imagery may pop out. So you may see yourself on this boat. You may see a building that reminds you of something that feels familiar. Those are all things I want you to lean into. And I think that when looking at my work, it's really important to keep in mind your own personal perspective, the memories you carry with you, the emotions you're feeling in the day, and also what you tend to daydream about. Because at the end, these are uncontextualized abstract landscapes. I leave room for my viewers to kind of leave a little bit of themselves within the journey while also thinking about a certain phenomenon. Has anyone ever been in a space where you feel like you haven't quite fit in and you're trying to understand the navigation to get to where you want to go? It's kind of like your head's down and you're running, right? I find that making paintings about sensations like that helps people pull their head up and maybe internally think about that situation as a space to be explored. I mean, so much of how we go about our lives we can't even express to each other, but somehow when you step in front of a painting, you can talk about that stuff with yourself. I remember the first time I ever looked at Van Gogh's painting of Ravine. It's actually at the MFA in the Impressionist wing. I remember feeling the same sensation I ever had the first time I ever went camping, which is freedom. Getting outside of the city walls, immersing yourself with nature. But 10, 15 years later, I'm sitting in a room with air conditioning in the middle of the summer, looking at this painting, feeling like I'm outside. It's that kind of transportation that painting really brings people, and it's why we still do it. I mean, we got iPhones in the crowd, we all drive smart cars probably. I mean, my car keeps track of where my wheel's going. We live in this technology-filled world where we're starting to not really do the things that make us human, but painting still remains. No matter how many LED screens we have in our lives, canvas will always be the internal reflection technology, which is why I continuously make paintings. Like myself, a work in progress, I like to reflect on my trajectory, but when people look at them, it gives you a chance to unplug from the phone, to not relate to every other data point that you've been told today, but to just bask in yourself. And to take it back to the subconscious, I find that a lot of life's anxieties, a lot of life's want to, your want in life to understand, all of that comes from the inability to fully put a name and a face to our subconscious. It's like this thing we talk about, but we don't really have a measurement for it. But that's the part that directly engages with the painting. You can't help to feel or to see something when you look at a painting, but you feel it or you see it regardless. And that's the cool thing about conversations like this. You could have a moment with my painting, like someone to me, I'll give you an example, was looking at this painting and they found a whale. I don't know where they found the whale, but this was a real whale for them. They pointed it out to me and we had a whole conversation. Turns out this person was remembering a time they went on a whale seeing expedition with a lost relative that they had just lost. It's just, the connection was mind-blowing to me, but it was so real. And the painting provided them with something that I couldn't have planned for. Do you know what I'm saying? The random connection that just came from inside of them. And that was a moment that is more gratifying than planning a whole image out from the beginning and making sure everyone sees the same sunset. I find that subjectivity is something I can never take away from my viewer, and which is why I stay in abstraction, because it allows both of us to have freedom when looking at the work. And on the one hand, we can both see the same agreed upon space, whether it being urban or natural, fluid or energetic. But what you bring to the table and what I take away from the table can always be two different things, which is important because not everyone's the same. And we live in a time period where we all should be comfortable with the images that we put forth as humans. So, I would like to answer questions if anyone has any. Yes.